Hey, it's Sol with another video. A potentially awkward video because it's largely about the Alliance, and lately I've turned into a super horde biased pro-chemical weapon genocidal Sylvanas fanboy. So let's see how the viewers tear me apart this time, yeah? As of right now, the idea of High Elves being a playable allied race is in stasis. Fans and critics have been responding with fervor and the usual talking points and memes. I myself have taken the position of supporting Blizzard's decision thus far for the reasons they've stated, as contested as they are. But today, I'm going to take all that I've read and commented on and do my own take on High Elves, whom I define as a largely unorganized group of separatists who reject the current government of quel'thalas. I'll focus first on where the conversation has lost its way. Then I'll talk on the why not of High Elves, not just as an allied race, but touch on their very survival in the Warcraft franchise. And then I'm going to build a case in favor for High Elves, but, spoiler alert, this is not a plea for them to be a playable race today, tomorrow, or well, anytime soon. There's a time for that, and at least right now that ship has sailed, and Alliance players have what they have. And by the end of this video, you might understand why I feel that waiting is better than shoehorning it in ASAP. Cause you know, some of you would reject the sudden inclusion of a half-baked idea, right? Yeah? There's a lot of information to soak in when looking at the two sides of this debate. Critics deride the idea because there will be too many elf races that they look the same as Void and Blood Elves, just to name a couple of talking points. Supporters claim that the High Elves are already a part of the Alliance, that they are better represented than the spattering of Void Elves or a few island trolls, but hey, at least they, made a city, kind of. I invite you to take a look at a few articles, like a very recent article on Wowhead, the Alurna Manifest of High Elves on Facebook, and this video presented by good old Taliesin. When you combine all this info preaching, we get a look at several fine points that make the case as to why High Elves should have been chosen to be the next allied race instead of the Void Elves, and at the same time do a pretty good job at contributing little more than noise.
What?
Okay, let me explain. As an example, the Taliesin video highlights some criteria to be fulfilled as a sort of test on the viability of High Elves or any race as an allied race, like if they're different enough, if there aren't enough of them, etc, etc. Their video addresses this, but I greatly disagree with this sort of approach for justifying the High Elves as an allied race. It's well made, it gets people fired up, but it does nothing to forward the case. Oh god, please don't mass downvote me, please don't mass downvote me. There's only two criteria to fulfill, the way that I see it. 1. Are High Elves a cool idea? I'm gonna get all sorts of interesting responses regardless of my answer, but we'll just say yes. 2. Do High Elves make sense? For the purpose of continuing this video and forwarding the narrative, we'll say that at the moment, no. Now, many of you already disagree with me, and that's fine, but like it or not, that's where we're at right now. Thanks to the current climate, there's this huge focus on the why or why not if High Elves make sense. But there's very little conversation focused on how to make High Elves make sense regardless of what your present opinion is. Get it? Okay, that's what I thought. Well, you know what? Strap in, we're going for a ride. Oh, and a disclaimer?
My life for the Horde.
You're getting a little push from me, which is kind of funny now. Let's see how to induct the High Elves into the Alliance. First, we need to know where the High Elves stand in this crazy world they live in. You probably read up on the history, but somehow, you might be lost in what's going on with them right now. There are a notable number of elves who are more closely associated with the Alliance than the Horde, and at the top of that food chain are the lovely Windrunner sisters Alurna and Verisa. It's kind of a shame letting other elves languish in some house or a stronghold in motherfucking space. But Alurna and Verisa are the most up-to-date Alliance-friendly elves we've got as of this writing, which makes them the best snapshot to the current state of their people. So, how they doing? Alurna leads the ren'dorei, or the Void Elves. From exiled researchers to near victims of the Void, they're a small group, but growing under Alurna's leadership, with both Blood Elves and High Elves learning the ways of the Void and rebelling against the usual forms of fashion. And they already seem battle-ready, making a flashy entrance in the upcoming Battle for Lordaeron scenario. Verisa leads the Silver Covenant, a militant faction comprised of High Elves who have lent their muscle in numerous conflicts and numerous expansions throughout the world of Warcraft, although currently it's difficult to tell their current state of battle readiness. More recently, they were a part of the Big Elf Party to help liberate Suramar. However, their presence in comparison to the regular armies of the Night Elves and Blood Elves, it speaks for itself. Verisa shows up on the Vindicar during the War on Argus, but it appears she's mostly there to interact with Alurna. And unlike the Void Elves, we don't see the Silver Covenant during the Battle for Lordaeron, or I just missed them. Sorry. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves just because of an in-game representation. Still, let's go to this previous shot. Come on, this is really sad. One of the big problems these two elven factions made for themselves, or I'm sorry, that Blizzard made these two elven factions make for themselves, is a possible conflict of interest, or at least a redundancy. Going back to this shot here, we can see that the Void is something that attracts both the High Elves and the former High Elves. I'm sorry, I'm gonna make that joke just once, okay? As far as I've looked though, I haven't seen any Blood Elves willingly breaking away to join the Silver Covenant or any other Alliance-aligned faction. Meanwhile, the government of quel'thalas is happy to allow its former and exiled citizens to make pilgrimages to the Sunwell, with the exception of their Void-infused brothers and sisters. On the surface, this leaves Vereesa's Silver Covenant in a questionable, perhaps a poor state, being a faction that's more militant and less cultural. In fact, I'll go as far to say that with Vereesa as one of the more prominent elves within the Alliance, she's utterly failed to unite her scattered people, if that was even a priority. It's an odd contrast to her elder sisters who seek to expand their numbers, with one being, more aggressive by far. It's both easy and hard to see why she's failed because we're working mostly within the context of a video game where if there's been no update, we can only assume that nothing's happened until the next update occurs. But let's take a quick glance around the world. Quel'dorei Lodge houses a few elves who abandoned magic altogether to release their addictions to magic, which apparently works. quel'thilien Lodge houses a number of the Wretched, the high elf version of the Withered basically. Alurian Stronghold houses a number of elves who were thought lost after the destruction of the Dark Portal. Many years later, those elves seem to have been left to their own devices. And in Stormwind, there are a couple more. I tried looking around for a minute, failed, so you just get this overhead shot. This helps write the narrative that the High Elves are alive, but they're not what I would call thriving, let alone united with a cause. The point I'm making is that Vereesa may lead the Silver Covenant, which is the largest and most organized elven faction, but she hasn't made herself an example of a rallying beacon for High Elves as a whole. Alurna, on the other hand, can manage to poach from both the Horde and Alliance, and has a motivation to grow and thrive. I want to at least address the future lineage of the Windrunners as an example for the future of the High Elves. The deeper integration of elves into non-elven cultures suggests a not-too-distant future where more elves will procreate with other races. Something that seems a little bit less likely for the Hordes-aligned factions, but that's a different topic to explore. With regards to Void Elf compatibility, it's also unexplored territory whether or not Void Elves can procreate normally. Alurna and Turalyon demonstrate incompatibility when considering that Turalyon is Lightforged. This makes sense, but it remains to be seen whether elves aligned with the Void are compatible with the non-Lightforged, like if they can't conceive or if they just bear little Void slime babies or something. This is where the elves stand at this point. The elves on the Horde have it all except for the name High Elf, which can be taken back with, a decree. Elves on the Alliance side might call themselves High Elves, but their identity is slowly slipping away, and their potential leadership doesn't seem very concerned. That is the story Blizzard has written for them so far, a race that has lost it all, with little motivation to reclaim what's theirs or to even move ahead on their own. In fact, the fate of the Alliance High Elves is hanging by a thread. It wouldn't take much at all for Alurna to flex a bit more, charisma, to encourage the remaining High Elves to join her and seek out what she hopes to be a better future, maybe. That story may already be written, and we just haven't seen it yet. Blizzard deciding to not support High Elves as an allied race then did not surprise me. But that's not why we're here, right? A number of players want playable High Elves in the Alliance, so let's explore that possibility by doing what Blizzard has done for other races. Build a foundation that will let this happen when the time is right. First, we have to concede that today's battle for High Elves is over, only so that we can move on to what could be next for this race. Sure, we can complain about the Void Elves all day, but it's too late for that. Today's story has been written. Tomorrow's has not, at least we hope. What we need is a new story for the elves that gets them out of the lull that they're currently in. It starts with Vereesa, or someone who's going to lead this faction, but let's go with Vereesa, who needs a figurative kick in the teeth to realize her people are culturally dying out. I don't quite know how that will be delivered. One possibility is to just see what Alurna is doing with the remaining High Elves. Vereesa will need to ask herself, is she okay with the formal induction of the quel'dorei into the Alliance? Maybe it should be, because her love for Ronan made it okay for her to bear half-elf children. She's learned to let go of the old ways, to dilute the elven bloodline. Anyway, seeing Aluria's ambitions might help fire her up in a way, to find the rest of the survivors of the Third War who reject the idea of quel'thalas joining the Horde, but yet again there's one more hurdle to overcome before that. Like I mentioned earlier, most elves are still allowed to make their pilgrimage to Quel'danas and the Sunwell, as if it were a neutral haven for all elves to share. There is a possibility that if Risa formally declares herself the leader of the High Elves and joins the Alliance as a member, the government of Quel'thalas will no longer allow these pilgrimages, resulting once again in a cutoff from their magical source. In fact, and sort of a spoiler, by the time the Battle for Azeroth expansion begins, Quel'thalas will stand alone on the Eastern Kingdoms as the last Horde bastion. There is a likelihood that because the realm is in a state of open war, pilgrimages will no longer be allowed regardless, and the Sunwell's defenses, if they've been restored, could be reactivated to further that point. This will put a lot of pressure on High Elves who relied on these pilgrimages to sate their addiction to magic, which means Risa will need to find a solution like the Blood Elves did. Okay, maybe not exactly like they did, or encourage them to completely reject the practice of magic like the Elves of Quel'danil did. This would have some pretty big implications in the world of Warcraft, namely, to lock out mages and warlocks maybe out of a class selection. It's safe to say that not all High Elves, nor players who are fans of them, would want to lose out on having access to magic. So a workaround would be the application of magical tattoos, similar to those Aluria wears, which would be a cool cosmetic attribute for those Alliance Elves. Next is to reinforce this idea with the urgency to organize. Like most of the races of the Horde, the High Elves have their backs to the wall and are an endangered people. They left behind all that they were, their home, their source of magic, and most of their brethren. Scattered, they've been slowly losing what few of their people remain. All they have left are their most basic ideals and the belief that membership within the Alliance will give them a brighter future. Which makes me wonder, maybe way too late when I was writing the script for this video, should these elves even be called High Elves anymore? The name of their people came from that they're the descendants of the Highborn, the ancient Night Elf nobility. The Blood Elves abandoned that name to mourn their near destruction of their people. The High Elves, as they still call themselves, are a group of even fewer, with no monarch and few, if any, ties to the kingdom they once lived in. They can still bear children, but given their numbers, it's likely that a number of them will intermingle with other races. Perhaps they too should abandon the past and look to the future. After all this current debate, I think it's been demonstrated that High Elves are really little more than a name. The process of turning the High Elves around will take time, because if the Battle for Azeroth is of any indication, even those stories have already been written, leaving the idea of High Elves as something fans will need to be patient for. But I can see that over time, small breadcrumbs can be dotted within the World of Warcraft timeline to suggest activity going on with these scattered elves. That maybe they're starting to organize and it's not entirely under Aluria's banner. It's very, very easy that the opposite could occur too. That Aluria would aggressively pull more and more of the scattered High Elves into her band, maybe Varisa too. All it takes is the stroke of a pen, and it's over. But instead, let's be optimistic and skip ahead for fun. Let's pretend that Blizzard caves and finally says yes, that a new form of elf can be unlocked. An allied race quest is set up that tells the tale of reforming the scattered elves into a new people with their own identity well beyond an exiled blood elf. Let's make a character and get in game. Following the near annihilation of their people, and rejecting their membership into the savage horde, the few remaining quel'thalas wandered the lands and holdouts throughout Azeroth, beset by constant attacks, magical addiction, and now the temptation of the void. The youngest Windrunner and leader of the Silver Covenant, Varisa, has been inspired by sheer desperation. She has now officially declared herself leader of her lost people, and is rallying her brothers and sisters to join her cause. As one of the few remaining elves who answered her call, it's up to you to defend the noble alliance, restore the pride of your people, and lead them into a new tomorrow. What we can expect from this is a new path for these elves, which can go in numerous directions. In the future, we can probably expect half-elf variants of this new race, but for now, we'll probably have to settle for a mix of noble and rugged-looking elves, worn from solitude, addiction, and a distaste for their former homeland. There's still existing arguments to be had from critics, like, oh, they'd still look way too similar to Blood Elves and Void Elves and other such things. But we don't know what'll happen in a few years either. There could be additional race variants, like even more troll tribes, goblin companies, dwarven clans, and so on, which would make the idea of more elves just one more conversation to have. The time for Alliance High Elves may not be now, but until they're all killed off or become void people, there's always tomorrow. Thanks for watching this sort of devil's advocate of an essay. I strongly encourage some healthy debates and conversation in a comment below, or just share your thoughts. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.